Hi, I'm Betty Selin. Excited today to speak with author Jenelle Brewer about releasing Jezebel, embracing the Lioness Within. Well, let's just start with maybe like a fingernail sketch. Let's not give all the details because we want everyone to read this crazy good book.
Thank
But
you.
let's start with just a little bit about the book.
Yeah, it's my memoirs, and a lot of people that know me wanted me to tell my story, and it's a tough read for a lot of people, and it's about abuse, addiction, and recovery, and it's my story, and as much as I could tell in that short little bit, but there's quite a bit of information, and yeah, it's really a story I hope to inspire hope in others, especially if they are struggling with addiction and recovery or they have family members, just to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and it is possible to overcome addiction.
Perfectly said. I did read the book, and we'll get into that later. The cover. So many people are intrigued by the cover. Tell us about how that came to be.
Yeah, so it's not really a picture of me, but it was like an image of Jezebel, sort of that way, where that person is really embracing their sexuality, and the shadow is the lioness that's always looking out for the strength in vulnerable women, especially people that have experienced abuse and they have that mask on. So the lioness shadow in the background represents the strength that we all have to have, and it's walking away, because as I got through recovery and have dealt with my inner demons, that I don't really need that lioness to be there fighting for me all the time. I have the freedom now to be more vulnerable and yeah, embrace who I really am.
I love that.
Hmm.
Now, how does it feel now that your story is out?
Yes, I have so many moments of fear and maybe even regret. I've been in the shower washing my hair and just randomly will think, why have I written this book? Just because my life is an open book now, and it's out there for everyone to read. There's no more secrets, and my life wasn't really a secret anyways. I've always been really open about my past, so but I felt like I was at points in time in my life where I had the strength to do that. So I, I'm at peace with it, but there are those moments when I think, what have I done? And when people always tell me how much it's helped them or how they can relate to it, all those feelings fade away.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, having met you, knowing nothing about your background, we met through
Yes.
volunteering of all
Yes.
things. And then when I read your book, I'm like, wow, like, could not believe
Yeah.
what you fought through,
Hmm.
and look at where you are today. Like, it gives me goosebumps just to think about that and the hope that you bring so many. Um, so was there one thing that triggered you saying, I have to write my memoir? Or was it a process?
I think just so many people encouraging me every time I started telling my story. And for a bit there, when I first got into sobriety and I first had my children, I really wanted to protect them more than anything. So I wasn't really telling my story. I really wanted to build myself as a professional, my own personal brand. Like you said, you knew me, but you were shocked to read my story. And I really wanted to leave that behind. But recognizing that I have to honor my past and the strength that it's taken and the work that it's taken for me to get to where I am today, I just really wanted to share the story. And the more people that told me I had to write the book when I would share bits of my story, that's actually more the driving factor
Makes
for
perfect
that.
sense.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I don't know if you can just narrow it down to one, but the obstacle, is there one, like the biggest obstacle that you faced?
In writing the book,
Yeah.
yeah, time for
Oh,
sure. Yeah, I work a lot. So I spent a lot of late nights writing the book after working, and definitely reliving trauma from my youth, and not only triggering other people, but triggering myself, and a lot of grief that I haven't had to experience, even talking about an old friend of mine and the dreams that we had, and now he's gone. Try not to get emotional.
oh, that's
And
okay. I mean,
yeah, it's hard.
that's hard to relive those moments that
Yeah.
I think probably for a lot of years you probably tried to put behind you.
For sure. And when I was living in active addiction, I didn't have time for those feelings. So
You just
really
suppress.
suppressing them. And I went to treatment, and had my kids right away with my partner at the time. And I just didn't have time to process grief. I didn't have time to process trauma. And I was just right away looking after these two little beings. And I just, when I was writing the book and going back to those memories, like going back in time, and I really almost had to go back into a trance because people ask me often, how did you remember all these stories? And a lot of,
Especially when you're, for lack of a better term, high, right?
yes,
You know,
yes,
like how did those memories come back? But they
yeah,
did.
yeah, and some of them are just burned into my mind,
Mm.
right? And I can't forget them. But I was just thinking of my one friend and how he died from addictions. And I just started crying one day. And
Mm.
I was running for city council and I was supposed to be door knocking. And I just laid in bed all day crying. And I thought of him and I thought of somebody else that committed suicide and all my friends that I lost that I never really had time to grieve. And I spent all day crying. Just the emotions that come up and resurface and dealing with a lot of even childhood fears and how that triggered a lot of fear working late at night and then going home in the dark. Sometimes my son had to wait at the door for me to get inside. Just really odd. And I was kept asking myself, what is going on with me? I'm not really that scared.
No, in this book, you are not a scaredy cat at all. Definitely not. You actually mentioned in the book that there were times initially that you struggled with being totally honest. But then what changed that?
Yeah. I think I was scared that people would be being too honest, people would judge me.
Uh,
And I still carry a bit of shame. I've released a lot of that. It is what it is. I can't
we
change
live
the
in a very
past.
small town.
Yeah,
That
and I grew up here, and you just can't change the past. And I think, sorry, I forget the question again.
so the fact that you struggled at the beginning with the right with
Oh, right.
writing
Yes.
to be completely honest,
Oh,
and
just
then
honest. Yeah.
and then it changed,
Yeah.
and obviously there was there like one moment that you thought I just have to be 100% forthright.
Right. And I was it was part and parcel of running for the city election and just really being fearful of what people might think. And as a community leader, you want to present yourself as a professional person, a person that people can rely on and trust. And I think there was a little bit of fear in being totally honest in that moment. And I ended up losing the election and
Not by much.
not by much, the first loser. But I did really well for my first run, and I'm actually really proud of myself. And I had a great team that supported me, and great group of friends and my family. But after I didn't get that seat, I sat back down and I had more time to write because I wasn't campaigning anymore. And I began reading through because the editing process is so onerous.
Is that painful?
The editing? Oh yes. Oh yes, because you're editing it and then you send it to an editor and they send back their feedback and they're not in your mind and they're trying to interpret your story
Mm.
and they're not getting it accurate, so they make changes and it's not really what you're trying to convey, the message you're trying to convey or the image you're trying to convey. So it's just going back and forth. And some chapters were harder than others. And when I was going through my chapters in the editing process, I just really noticed I was holding back. And I think I was doing it subconsciously. I didn't
Mm.
do it intentionally.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know what? No, I want to be authentic because this is a true story. And there are people out there that are going to relate. And I'm not doing myself a service or anybody else that's reading the book because really I think of the book as more of a service to help people. Like
Mm.
it is to inspire hope. And I wanted people to relate with the truth. And and it's not that it wasn't truthful. I just don't think I was honest enough for people to really capture what it's like to live in addiction and overcome trauma and all the things that come with being a survivor of abuse as a child and how that surfaces throughout your adult life. And I just wanted to be more honest and I wanted people to be able to relate that were also hurting.
You mentioned your childhood. I mean, there were some great things about your childhood as well.
So many amazing things. I had so many and now I get to focus on that because I feel like there were times in my life where I really focused on the trauma and I couldn't let go of that. And even writing the book has been healing in that way. And I had the most amazing parents. We grew up on a ranch. I rode horses. I was a figure skater. I was in gymnastics, baseball, swimming, ballet, you
It
name
sounds
it.
like your parents did all the right things to keep you busy and out of trouble.
My parents did all the right things, and they didn't know that I was witnessing abuse and being abused. And I never shared it, and I don't know if it was just the time or the resources and just being fearful of not being believed. And I just, yeah, didn't share any of that with them, and I just really tried to get through life on my own, and it was a tough go, and it didn't work out well. So
But in the end,
in the
look at you
end,
now.
in the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a happy ending to a very sad story.
Janelle, looking back, maybe even through the writing process, was there a moment when you knew I'm in trouble? I am in really big trouble. If I don't make a change, will I have the outcome of some of my friends
When I was living that
when
life,
you were living that life?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think definitely when my boyfriend died, that was a big thing for me. Without him, I really felt like I had nothing, and I had nothing at that time, anyway. So, but I think he was the one of the last things that was keeping me tied to that life, and when I lost him, it was a lot more than I was able to cope with, and I really knew the mortality of that life really hit me. Although many of my friends had died, and there's very few of my friends from back then that are still alive, and I talk about it in the book too. In the very first chapter, is that I was in a jail cell, and it was just city cells, not actual jail, but I was laying there, and I just knew then, like, I needed help. I needed help. I was going to jail. I was going to end up dead. I I knew I could do better. I really worried about my parents. My sister had died earlier in the 90s, and my mom used to always beg me to change my life because she couldn't handle losing another child,
And you did.
and I did. I was definitely a motivating factor, and yeah. So losing my sister, losing my boyfriend, and just the reality of that life, and I wasn't in a good place,
Hmm.
and I felt alone, and yeah, I knew I was at death's door.
Wow.
Yeah.
You talked about your parents briefly, and you talk about them a little bit in the book. You said that you wanted this to be a book about hope. What advice, do you have any advice that you would give other parents that are terrified that this could happen? Because it could happen to anyone.
It could happen to anyone. Yeah, and abuse isn't a economic thing. It isn't you know, uh, there's just it seems to be everywhere when you look around. And I mean, for me, I just really didn't want to go back to that house where I was being abused, and I used to cry and beg. And I think there's just that social niceties
Mm.
and the expectations that of that time and that generation that I don't think it was really overlooked. And I think, I was a difficult child and very stubborn. So, it might have been attributed to my stubbornness, but I think just really, like, if your children are just so resistant to people, you know,
Such good advice. Like
yeah,
just listen.
just
Just
listen,
listen. Yeah.
just listen. And I think really trust your instinct. And, there's no really one answer,
Of course not.
right?
No, of
And
course not.
and I just think we just got to hold our young ones dear and try our best, because we can do everything that we can, and there's no guarantees in life, but really I think just watching your kids' behavior, and
That is
and
really great advice.
and I think
Really
in
great
this
advice.
day and age, support for mental health is much more common.
True.
So I think making sure that your kids have access to mental health supports, if that's possible,
Janelle,
would
do you
be a
mind
real
sharing
good
what kind
tool.
of impact the book being so public now has had on you and your family?
Yeah, actually, my family haven't really talked about it a little bit. And so no one's mad at me that I could see, you know. I don't know.
Well, because they know you wrote with good intent.
I think so, yeah. And you know, and it's not really about what my family did and didn't do. It was really my story.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to talk a lot more about motherhood. And it was really difficult, you know, being Indigenous. My father went to residential school. You know, my mother was Irish Catholic and from a big family, and it, you know, it wasn't tough, but you know, it wasn't a lot of I love yous and a lot of hugs. It was a rancher family.
I think that's
It's
also a
tip,
generational
yeah,
thing, don't you
typical of the
think? Yeah.
time,
Hmm.
absolutely. Because my mom had me when she was 42, my dad was 45, so they were almost a generation removed
Right.
compared to my other friends' parents. And yeah, definitely typical of the time. But going from that to addiction to being a mother and sorting through motherhood with trauma and recovering from addiction and sorting through all that was difficult. It was trying. You know, I came from the street where, you know, people, you know, kind of did what I said to some respect.
Well, you were a
And
pretty
then
tough cookie.
and then and then
You
I
didn't
had
back down from anybody, girl.
not well, no, not really. I mean there's things you just
There are
have to
some moments in this book, people. Some moments. Yeah.
yeah, and you have to be tough. You
Obviously,
have to
to
be tough.
survive on the street. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
there's not really a lot of room for error. And
Ooh, well said.
yeah,
Hmm.
and I think, and then all of a sudden, just went from living on the street pretty much to having children, and
That's a pretty quick
it's a
transition.
pretty quick transition. There wasn't a lot of time for me, like I said, to do my grief healing, any trauma healing. I was just now I'm a mother, and what I've had to learn from was my what my mother and my father taught me, which was a lot of great things, and I definitely attribute my sobriety and my healing to the support my family has given me since I've turned my life around. But yeah, it was difficult and it was challenging, and you know, I wish I did a lot of things differently, and you know,
Most of us do.
yeah,
Who didn't even have the kind of, life that you did,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, you know, you can read all the books you want, and it might not apply to your situation, and I think that's the one thing. Like I think has been really tough for me in writing this book is I didn't have time to share that story. So that's what I was talking about earlier. The editor would, you know, I did talk a bit about motherhood, and she removed that
Mm.
from the point. And she said, if you want to write a book about motherhood, write a book about motherhood. And there was other things too. If you want to write a book about this, write a book about this. And I thought, you know what, she's right. So
Keep it on topic.
keep it
Yeah.
on theme,
Hmm.
and that's why I hired an editor, because you know you can go all over the place and there's just so many stories, and just trying to keep it focused on trauma, addiction, and recovery. And yeah.
When you look at what's happening in our world today, Janelle, does it keep you awake at night? I see, there seems to be, or maybe it was hidden before, I don't know. It just seems to be addiction is now so rampant and so open
Yeah.
and everywhere.
Yeah, and I think by the time I went to treatment, things were starting to change. And it was a lot more prevalent, and I think it's more prevalent in the streets. I think there's issues with housing, but mostly what I wonder, and I don't really know because I'm not out there anymore and I'm not working in that industry. I wonder
Hmm.
if it's the synthetic contributions to, you know, because before, even when I quit, um, it wasn't the same product or
But you're
drugs.
saying the drugs are different. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying? Yeah.
yeah, and I was noticing that when I finally went to treatment, things were not the same, and they didn't feel good, and I'm so grateful for all the help that my parents gave me to go to treatment, and my family support. And you know, sometimes when I'm driving down the street and I see people, I just think I'm so lucky
Hmm.
that that's not me. because that could have been me. And it's scary to think that I was on that path, and I was so close to being that person, and I'm not today. And the opportunities, even my community at the Okanagan Indian Band have given me through work, and there's just so many people that have supported my sobriety and my journey in life, and even my kids have been so amazing. But yeah, when I look around and I just see, I don't really know though, but it is scary, and I think there's a lot of resources that are being put into it, and I think they're all important on every level. I know when I was using, it was really difficult to get into a treatment center. It was really difficult for me
I
to
don't
get
think
in.
that's improved, sadly.
No, it
You
hasn't.
know? Yeah.
And really,
Hmm.
and it's interesting because when I was in the treatment center and I was done and they were about to send me home, and I just said, no, I can't go home.
You knew you weren't ready.
I knew I wasn't ready. I said, if I go home right now, and it was almost really all I knew because I started so young that I just knew I was going to go home and get back into the same cycle, and I knew I was going to die. And I asked to stay. They had what they call a recovery housing, I guess, or I don't know what they call it now, but they used
Sort
to
of a
call it
transition kind
second
of,
stage, yeah,
right?
transition. And I asked to stay there, and I was the first person they ever had asked to stay in treatment.
That
And
says a lot about you, Janelle.
yeah, and I didn't go home, and I stayed there for a bit, and then literally got pregnant within the year. So then I was like rolled into motherhood, and my life continued, and I was scared. I was scared. I just came out of treatment. I really didn't have anything to my name yet, and I was pregnant, and I was scared.
Wow.
Yeah, I was more scared becoming a mother than I was ever, I think, on the street.
Oh, wow. All you people thinking about being a mom, don't let that scare you off.
It is wonderful. It's wonderful.
I read a quote recently that said, "You learn more from failure than from success." Would you
Yes,
agree or disagree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And and one thing I've always told my kids, if you're not making mistakes, you need to get off your butt and do something, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not doing anything. And we learn from failures and mistakes, and even still sometimes I get nervous that I'm going to fail, and I get into my head about it, and sometimes I don't want to take that step forward, and I push myself because I know I'm going to learn.
Well, I certainly hope you're proud of yourself because, I mean, just like like I said, when I met you, I had no idea your background. Like I
Hmm.
would never have guessed that you were living on the streets. Like you
Hmm.
certainly don't present yourself. Like I just think that this is a book of hope because
Yeah.
I mean, if you can do it, do you feel like if you can do it,
I had so
anybody?
many friends when I on the streets when I cleaned up because I was really bad. I was a really I just needed to be high 24/7. That's all I thought about. I just didn't want to feel a feeling.
Mhm.
And I think there's a piece too where I didn't want to be accountable.
So, what's next for you then? Does that mean we're going to see you continue to write? Did you love it? I mean,
I
as
did
hard as it
love
must have been.
it was hard. I think I'll plan a little better. I won't be doing it on a year that I'm running for elections, and I work quite hard, and I'm on a board, so I was working long hours and then doing the editing late at night until 3 in the morning, and getting up and going to work in the morning, and trying to keep up with everything. I definitely think I'd plan it a lot better so that I'm not doing it at
Like
three in the
four
morning.
things at once, like
Yeah,
typical
yeah.
mother
It'll
style.
be its own
Yeah.
project for sure.
So we're going to hear
Yeah.
more from you. I like that.
Yeah, I do have a plan, and I'll probably write a book about motherhood and a little bit about, you know, the growth that you get, because no one can explain to you what motherhood's gonna
It changes you
do.
no matter
Yeah.
what. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
just changes the way your mindset. And I think maybe a bit slower for me because I was such a risk taker when I was younger. And then, there's a point where I just had these kids and I was responsible for them. And I had to look after them, and I couldn't take risks anymore because I used to volunteer firefight. And there was just one day where I thought, if something happens to me, who looks after my kids? And And shortly after that, a young man passed away in a neighboring jurisdiction and from firefighting, and it just reaffirmed my choice. And
But you loved it, as you talk about
I
in the
miss it.
book, how much you
I do
loved
miss
it.
it.
Yeah. That's a special community, that firefighting bond, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. And I still hold that with a lot of the people that I've met through that time. And yeah, so you change the way you think, and you don't think that'll ever happen. And I always thought I'll never be an empty nester. And now that I'm at that point, I worry about myself. What shall I
Well,
do?
you'll have more time to
I'll
write.
have more time to write.
So, Janelle, obviously people are going to want to read this. How can they get this? How can they get their hands on your story?
Yeah, right now I have my website, JenelleBrewer.ca, all E's, Jenelle.
Janelle, thank you so much for sharing your time today.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I can't wait to read what you write next.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for coming.
Oh, my
Yeah,
pleasure. My
and
absolute
sitting with
pleasure.
me, and yeah.
Getting to know your story, your backstory, really just like I said earlier, your story is a story of hope for me. And, knowing people who've struggled, through addiction, and just like seeing how successful you are. Honestly, like, I hope you are so proud of yourself, because if you're not, girl, you ought to be, because
Thank you. I
you have
appreciate
come a
that. I
long
really
way.
appreciate that. I have to remind myself, be proud of myself, and
Good for you.
yeah,
Can't wait to see what's next from Jenelle Brewer, Vernon author.
thank you.